not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
I think I missed them.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Love to. How about global thermonuclear war?
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
Later, let's play global thermonuclear war.
Fine.
All right.
Hello, and welcome to Carnival Personnel Sideshow. I'm Jacques.
I am Biff.
And today we have, I'm really excited about this. This is the sideshow or the episode of Carnival Personnel that my kids might be able to listen to from start to finish and be excited about it. We have our good friend Besh on today, who is a video game programmer. And I'll throw it out there right away. When my 10-year-old found out what he did for a living and quote unquote got to meet him, he had the same look in his eye that I did when I was 10 and I got to meet Brad Park after a Bruins game. So,
Whoa. Who's Brad Park?
Douglas Bradford Park was born in...
No, nobody cares.
Hey, number 2 behind number 4. Anyways, so...
The only guy that cares is on the podcast.
I know you love him, Biff. But with all that said, welcome and let's dive right in. So, Besh.
Okay.
Let's see. First of all, how did you fall into this world of programming? Was it something that you knew at a young age? You were playing games and you wanted to make games, or how did this all come about?
Primarily playing games and wanting to make them after that, for sure. That was definitely it. We had, when I was a kid, we had Doom on like this really terrible IBM computer, and it came with like this massive book that was like how to code your own levels, and I just sat with that for days and days and days, and it just sprung from there pretty much after that. Yeah. And we had some consoles. We had like the NES and the Super Nintendo, but I really focused on the computer because that's where I could make stuff primarily.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can we step back just a little bit, Besh, and kind of go back to the point that Jock was making, because programming games is essentially that's like a monster field, right? I mean, there's
a lot going on.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more specific about like what kind of games you program, or how, what you do in that sense. Kind of set the stage.
Yeah, definitely. So early on when I was making, first I was just like coding Doom levels or whatever, right? But you start to get in, like, games just has so many different facets behind it, because it's not just programming, it's like art and sound and everything's sort of like mishmashed all involved. So afterwards, when I was growing up more, I started making like Flash games on like some terrible website I had as a child. It's probably gone now. But I would try to just make stuff that I already liked. Like if I played like Mario or something, I'd try to make something similar to that, because it's kind of what you do as a kid. You mimic what other things you do, and then you sort of try to like mix and match. Like, oh, I really like this about that. Let's put it with this. Put things together. So it definitely starts to teach you a lot of different things, though, because I mean, I didn't have like I do today, like artists and stuff like that. It was just myself. So if I wanted to draw a new character, I had to do it myself, pretty much.
And now when you started, Did you have like older siblings or friends who kind of got you in it? Like, how did you one day decide, I want to stop playing games and make games? And were you in an environment that supported that?
I wouldn't say any of my siblings had any interest in it at all. It was pretty much just myself. I did grow up playing video games with all my siblings. I'm middle child of 5 kids, so there's plenty of people to play games with. But I was the only one who was primarily interested in creating them. And I'm not really sure how I really got that interest. I think it was just I was really sucked and involved in like the world and everything whenever I played, and I wanted to be a part of like how that was done. And most certainly, like the home which I grew up in, my father, I mean, we had a computer where at a time when not everyone had a computer in their house. The internet was just was there, but like barely anything was worthwhile on there. And we had those things, so it was definitely a good environment for myself, because I was first, for a while I was learning from books, but eventually I was able to learn online. And I think that the vast majority of material on the internet, anyone can learn anything these days, wherever they want, whenever they want, and video games especially. And I think that's why you have like so many young developers these days in software and video games itself.
Now, did you have any formal training, or is this all just self-taught over the years?
So I would say that the vast majority of my knowledge is self-taught. I did go to school eventually for it. I learned practically nothing. There wasn't much, like I learned all the technicalities and terminology and all that type of stuff for industry and things like that. But in terms of that's in terms of like software development. But then video game development is a completely different thing. Like software development is just a small piece of that whole chunk. When it comes to things like game design, like why are certain games fun? Like why is this game fun versus this game being like dog shit or whatever, right? It's like the difference is because there's people who took the time to like meticulously put things together, and that is something that takes a lot more skill and like knowledge, in my opinion, than it comes to the programming, because there's a lot of people who know how to program. Not a lot of people can make a fun game.
It's funny, Biff and I have a very, very good friend who, and I didn't know he had a programming background. He's crazy smart, crazy goofy. And I remember there was one weekend he went to a great college and got a degree in mechanical engineering, I believe, at like RPI. One day I hadn't heard from him. Like we normally would like hang out on a Saturday. I couldn't get a hold of him on Sunday. Monday he finally called and said, "Hey, sorry I didn't get back to you. There was a game from childhood that he couldn't find anywhere, so he programmed it." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, he's like, "Yeah, no." And I'm like, "Wait, you're a programmer?" He all self-taught, and this is when the .com boom happened. And upon graduating, he never used his mechanical engineering degree. He went straight, into the .com world. I think it was like, do you remember what he worked for? It was like PetSmart or something like that, or not?
One of those guys, yeah.
But so with you, I mean, so you're starting to develop games. When you say younger, are you talking like junior high? You're talking early high school? When did you sit down and say, "I like Mario, I like this other game, let me see if I can merge them together and make a game that I like"?
I probably started like in any serious fashion around like 13. But I was like making like diddling around on the computer trying to code whatever, probably around when I was like 10 or something like that. But not in any like real fashion until I was like 13 or so. So all through middle school and then all through high school I was doing it. And then towards the end of high school, I was for a while I didn't want to do it as like a job, because I was like, this isn't a real job. Like I had this idea in my head that video games wasn't a real job, or that it would be a pointless endeavor, that I would never be able to get a job in that. And then one day I decided, like, I enjoy it too much to keep away from it. I can't keep away from it. So I have to do it. So I sat down, and that's what I put my full focus in when I was around probably like 18, 19. And it's just been what I've pretty much been doing ever since. I've done other things here and there, but this has been like my main focus for like as a career primarily.
So you're 15, 16 years old, and you're spending your nights and weekends doing that. Are your parents telling you, get outside and play? Did you play any sports that you do or anything, or was this your life? And were your parents cool with that? Were your teachers cool with that? Or were you the kind of, oh, what the hell is that kid up to now? Why is he always staring at a computer screen?
Well, it's kind of, so my mom didn't really understand much anything about computers, and she hates video games. She wanted to keep us away from them. She's like, "Oh, it'll rot your brain," and all this type of stuff. So any video games that we had as kids, we had to buy them ourselves, because our mom wasn't going to get us anything. So we had to get them ourselves, and we did it all despite what she wanted. My dad, he saw that I was programming, and he always wished that he went into software in college instead of what he went into petroleum engineering, because he said that, like he knew it was going to be the future, but he didn't end up doing it. So he was more than okay with me spending all my time with that. My friends who I hung out with, they didn't even know I was doing any of this. Like I was just doing it on my own time, and I never shared it with them for whatever reason. It was always something I just sort of did privately. My brothers and them, they knew, but other than that, no one really outside of my family really knew that I would spend my time doing this. And I would still hang out with friends and stuff. Didn't play any sports because, I'm playing video games. No way we're doing that. So we fit the stereotype pretty well. But other than that, it would be what I spend most of my free time on. If I wasn't, doing my homework or seeing friends, I would be doing this pretty much all the time and up into the night, no matter what.
And what was the process to applying for college? I assume you majored in programming, or did you major in something else and minor in programming to have a fallback? What was your process of getting into college? And in college, was your time split between majors or something, or was it just strictly focused on programming?
Well, I went and applied for a bachelor's in software engineering and a associate's in comp sci, pretty much, and that was kind of like my main thing, because there's degrees for game development, but you're really putting yourself in a small peg when it comes to a job if you're doing that. Whereas like software engineering, I could do anything. I could do a whole lot of stuff with this, but I could also make games. So this was my thinking. And for a while, like I still had it in my head that I shouldn't go into games. Like I'll make games on the side and I'll get a job doing whatever, right? So I was doing like psychology or something. I had like half a psych degree. Completely abandoned it. It was a complete waste of my time. Went full in on the software and everything like that. And pretty much most of my college time was like class, develop game, nothing in between, no time for, relationships, anything like that. This is what I was going to be doing. It really is like very, very time consuming, but you kind of get it like a bug where you have to really, really focus it on it, and you get really addicted to it at some point, for sure.
And Biff,
Yeah.
how did you get into computer sciences?
So I think my path is completely different. I'm not really a computer scientist, but I am in the IT sector, and I do very limited coding, but it's really on a needs basis, and I really don't provide, at least not anymore, any kind of a coded solution. But I guess I do want to kind of turn it back to you a little bit, because so the thing with gaming is very different from a lot of the traditional programming, because traditional programming actually has very set specific goals around it. And
Yes.
And so I want you to kind of can you kind of talk us through some of the art aspect of it? Because gaming has an art aspect of it that isn't really part of the traditional, and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to it's kind of funny because whenever I get like new people working with me and stuff who just started out with like game development, I kind of explain to them, I was like, this job is pretty much going to ruin some video games for you, because you're going to kind of see behind the curtain and see that, when you play games, everything's sort of set up as like a facade. It's kind of like a play, and you look behind and you see everything's made out of cardboard. When you see how everything is made, it kind of like demystifies it a little. But that's kind of like, it's kind of cool seeing that at the same time for most people. When it comes to the art end, the art and the programming really go hand in hand. There's still like data structures and stuff like that you would do in other software development that's still used in video games, but now we're really focusing in with the art. And it could be as so simple as like, if you're working with people who are doing like the interface, like with anything on the screen showing like your health or your points or whatever, how does that look? How does it animate? Communicating between the artist and the programmer, or often it'd be the same person most of the time. There's a whole field just for doing that as a programmer. Making it so that the experience of the player is very encouraging. It's what we call game feel.
Right.
It's like that feeling you get when you see like, if like you hit an enemy and a big thing flashes up on the screen, it gives you like this rush feeling. Figuring out how that works is very hard, because a lot of game design is actually based around human psychology. Like, what do people find enjoyable? This is kind of very important. Like you see a lot of games like games where you can collect items. People like to store them in like their inventory or whatever, and they'll just hoard like tons and tons of things. And you kind of ask yourself, like, why do people do this when they play these games? Even when it's not necessary they do it. It's because humans have a natural urge to gather things and store them. And they do it in these virtual environments as well. So these kind of things, we can toy with them as developers and designers to like make it so that it's more rewarding when you play, essentially.
Right.
And
I think
go ahead, Biff.
no, I was saying that's a great point in terms of I think so. There is that. There are so many games where you look at it like visually they look great, and I think, and so maybe it's the same as like movies that are fulfilling versus not fulfilling, right? You could have movies with great visuals, but unless you kind of catch, the participants, whatever it be, heart or psyche or whatever you want to call it, right? There's something that has to capture the audience, and I think in
Absolutely.
that sense, I think there's the challenge there. And I guess what is do you have a kind of an approach in terms of how do you approach the idea of how am I going to make the audience really enjoy even if it's just one component of a game, even if it's not the game as a whole, or what's your approach on that?
Well, it kind of depends on what kind of game we're making, right? But in terms of like enjoyment, you kind of have to go off of yourself a lot of the time too. It's like, well, what do I enjoy? Because chances are, if you like it, somebody else is going to like it too. Even if it's a small portion, if you're a weirdo like me. So some stuff I like, people don't like at all. But it kind of depends. When you're designing a game and you have like overall goal, some people make games these days, like games are such a wide variety of things as an art form. Now you have like art games, which are like avant-garde, like almost like film type story experiences. And, that's like clearly just trying to get a story across. Some games have nothing to do with the story and you don't care about it. It's just fun to just engage in it. So it kind of has to do with what kind of game we're making. And we're going to lean heavily into whatever the most enjoyable aspect of that game is. If it's a puzzle game, how can we make each puzzle very interesting? If it's, a game with like fighting, how can we make the fighting feel real or really involved, And from an art standpoint, the art styles are kind of like all over the place these days because now these days you could still have new games that are made with like pixel art because it's like harping back. Whereas it's kind of funny compared to movies because not many people want to go and make another black and white movie. Some people do it, but you're not going to have this wide appeal. Whereas in video games, you make a pixel art game, it could sell out. There'd be tons and tons of people buying it. They still into it. So there's different art styles from realism to like more cartoony looking to very low resolution, like all across the board. So there's a lot of options that you have to kind of decide and weigh with depending on what you're doing.
It's funny. I want to take a step back because when I was asking you about college, if you went in as a programmer, had different majors, and you said you were doing psych for a while, and you're like, yeah, that was completely useless. And then a few minutes later, you're like, well, we get into the psychology of this. And I'm like, no, it's funny. You also said like some people find other things interesting and what you like. And it's funny because there's a couple examples I can think of recently. A few years ago, my oldest kid got into Fallout. I forget what it was, the one that was set in Boston in like the 50s.
Fallout 4.
And he loved it. And one of our friends on the podcast, who's a huge gamer, our friend Chris, lived for the game, just loved it. I had a lot of fun. And then it got to the point where now you have to build houses for these people. Now you have to build a garden. And I'm like, I'm out. And then another friend of mine a couple years ago, like Red Dawn Redemption was huge. And my friend's wife, favorite part of the game is that you can make the guy shave. Like you could actually, and in real life, I fucking hate shaving. Why am I going to spend an hour making this cowboy shave? So it is funny to kind of figure out when you were saying that, like, what do I like? But then I got to think of what other people like, and that's where the collaboration comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it kind of depends. So, like, it's funny you bring up Fallout. I'm a very big Fallout fan, and that is the aspect that I hated about Fallout 4 as a player, because that was the only one that had, like, the house building and stuff like that. And this is the big thing with like AAA games these days, which is like the big budget games.
Pretend an old guy like me doesn't know what are the terms, because if it's AAA, I equate that to baseball. There's single A, double A, AAA, and then the pros. Or in music, it's the same kind of thing.
So in the world of games, you pretty much have like small studios, you have like indie studios, and then you have AAA developers. These are like Nintendo, Sony, Xbox, Naughty Dog, like people like Bethesda, like these big companies. And they're the ones they spend billions and billions of dollars on one game. Um, so what ends up happening these days in AAA titles, the big titles, such as Fallout, is that they are investing so much money into this game that they're like, we need to make sure this appeals to a lot of people. Otherwise, we're not going to make anything in return. So when they add like the house building and stuff to Fallout 4, because Fallout used to be a bit of a smaller series before, they're doing it because they're like, okay, someone out there likes this. But to me, it just feels like you're putting a half-assed city builder in a shooting RPG. Like you shouldn't be. You should be focusing on what's good. Don't focus on making something else that's half-assed. And they'll do that, and that's kind of like the big trend nowadays with like the bigger games is that they'll try to shove everything in one game because this way it's like you can't fail, right? But what and you end up doing is like you have a lot of things done not that great and just a whole lot of that instead of one thing done really, really well. So these days, the indie games, they really shine because while they're smaller, they do one thing very, very good. So that's kind of like, for me anyways, that's what I would prefer. But it seems like the younger generations these days, because I do make a lot of games for kids, they like a lot of games that I think are terrible. So it's kind of like trying to find like, can they still like things that I grew up that I liked, you know? Are these things universally like likable, or is it just because I was there and I liked it back then because I was a kid growing up then and that was the game that was there to play? It's kind of like liking movies from the 80s. If you grew up in the 80s, and some people today are like, oh, I don't like those movies, they're too old for me, or something like that.
Well,
I think there's definitely that's a great point, right? It's like what the audience is also is there's an evolving audience also because their base point in terms of entertainment is vastly different from yours and vastly different from Jacques and I, who are much
Yeah.
geeks like us. Our starting point is we were the ones that saw that Star Wars in the theaters, the first
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
green screen technology first came to be, versus my son who's had all of the advanced CGI, the moment he's born, that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a challenge. But so when you make stuff for kids, I mean, is that like do you feel like you're like the fast food chains trying to how do we cater to the kids?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
is
It really is like that. It really is like that. It's like how can we it's funny because I'm pretty young, but when we're sitting around talking this and I'm trying to figure out what they like, they talk about what stuff I like I'm an old man or something like that, and I'm like geez, I'm not old, like but they did grow up with all these big things already, right? To me, when 3D stuff was coming out, I was impressed by it as a child, but that's not impressive anymore. So it's like, what is the wow factor anymore like that, right? And it's pretty much is only going to come down to the design.
Yep.
And there are certain things that, from a design standpoint, that appeal more to children than it does to adults. And there's also like that middle ground, which is kind of where I tend to try to get things, because I do have older players as well, because I want both. But when it comes to kids, there's like very, very simplistic and methods of like getting them interested, keeping them hooked on and all that type of stuff. It kind of depends on what you're going for with each one. But then you also have things where little kids, we'll say 8 to 12 years old or something like that, they like stuff that older players like because it's cool to like things that older kids like, right? So it's you can kind of get both with that too.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. Yeah.
I remember
that's really fascinating.
The only games I've really gotten into is the Batman series, the 4 Batman series, well, the 3 Arkham and the kind of 4th one, and then Resident Evil. That's really my jam. And it's funny because I think he was like 6 or 7, and the oldest one was like maybe 9 or 10 when Resident Evil 7 came out. And first boss fight was probably the second hardest of the game, and I just couldn't get through it. I remember the older one got really scared playing it, and here comes our little guy, the one that you've met, Ash, a few times, and he took him like 2 tries. He got through. I'm like, how are you not scared shitless of this? And then when he had his birthday, we got one of those photo cakes, and it's a picture of that, and it's a possessed demon. But no, it's funny how, like you said, that his dad likes this game, his brother likes this game, so he was way too young, and I'm a bad person, so I let him play. I want to take a step back. So you're in college. How did you How did you get your first job? Like, how did you go from I like making games to hey, I'm making games for a living?
Well, my first like job was in graphic design, and I don't have like any graphic design background aside from working in the field. Don't ask me how I got that job. I really don't know how I did. But essentially, because I was doing art all the time for games, I was already doing graphic design because I already had a sense of what looked good on the screen, what was eye-catching, where everything should be design-wise in terms of that. So I had gotten a job doing graphic design for a while, for things like advertisements and stuff like that for the place that I was working at, and I had a big portfolio to give to them. I think it's the only reason I got the job was because I had this very big portfolio, but it was all game stuff. So I like quickly like put some stuff together, like I'll design some ads and I'll shove them in there, and they'll think that I've been doing this forever, and it worked. So it definitely helped me in that regard. And in terms of video games, I started developing for stuff online, primarily on the Roblox platform, and from that I got into their developers program. So like as an official developer on like the site and whatnot. And it's kind of been going from there, like, because that site kind of works sort of like similar to YouTube. Like you put your game up, and if a lot of people are playing it, you get like AdSense and like other things, like any microtransactions that might go into it or what have you. You get all that in return, and that's kind of like the main way I got into that.
But you have a quote unquote day job now, working for just one company. Yes? No?
Primarily still this.
Okay. So is it safe to say kind of you're like your own boss?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And do you like that?
Oh, of course. Who wouldn't? I mean, okay. I will say it does get difficult at sometimes because like, you have to build your own structure, right? Within your work-life balance, which is pretty much non-existent a lot of the time when you're doing stuff like this. And the other thing is too, being in charge of other people or with other people, it's kind of gets a little difficult at times. I can have days where I'm like, I feel like crap, I'm not going to do anything today, but I have to make it up, and I have to make sure that I make it up. No one's going to tell me, hey, you're going to be fired over. It's like, no, you have to do it, or else you can't fire yourself. You're pretty much just destitute if you don't, if you don't do it.
No, I mean, it's a balancing. In my profession, it's the same thing. I haven't punched a clock with anybody in nearly 20 years, which I love, absolutely love. But there are some times where it's like, hey, nothing's really going on, and it'd be nice to have that security. So it's great if you can operate it, if you can motivate yourself. Have you ever worked for one of these AAA companies, and would you?
Personally, I wouldn't want to. I know I have friends who do. There's several reasons why I wouldn't want to outside of just like what I enjoy doing now. In terms of like game development, working for a AAA company is very, very intense. And there's a lot of, it's funny because there's a lot of stuff in the new, like gaming news and stuff like that right now about how difficult the industry is on developers. It's pretty tough because video games are not like movies, but they're treated like the development cycle is treated like films. They take a lot of time and effort to work. A movie, when you put it together, you can look at it and be like, all right, it looks good, we can put it out. Video game, you have to keep playing it and playing and playing it to see if there's anything wrong, if anything is broken, but they don't give them enough time. So what ends up happening is that people are sleeping in the studio, they're working long hours for not what they should be making in terms of pay. We're talking like some software developers making like 60 to 70 grand a year for working weekends all throughout the week just to make for this one game, and you got to get it out by Christmas or the shareholders are going to be very, very upset. So it's very, very competitive, very, very difficult field, and there's been a lot of I guess like social protests going on about like and unionizing and stuff like that within industry. It's been really tough lately.
Yeah, I remember, the scary thing. I think one of my kids started to get into like Telltale games, and we bought a couple of them. And then I remember the story where a bunch of people had just like moved to is it Northern California, I think, or I think that's where all the companies are. And Telltale just went out of business one day. Like,
Yeah.
just there was no warning. It looked like they had a couple titles that they had locked up too. They had like, I'm trying to think of the 2 or 3 titles which are almost guaranteed money makers. Like we bought a Batman title. Trying to think of some of the other, and it
They
just
had a
went
lot
belly
sewn up.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the thing when it comes to video games that it's really like different in the sense like I keep comparing it to movies, but that's really the only other thing I can compare it to. Because it used to be that movies were like the highest production art form in terms of cost. Now it's video games. And the thing is that the overhead is so high. It doesn't matter if your game is all over the place. If you don't make enough to keep the lights on, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And what was happening with Telltale was primarily their overhead was just too high. And the production and everything like that, it was just too much at the end of the day for it to be as a sustainable model. And that's why like a lot of the newer games, they play it really, really safe. But it's unfortunately Telltale is just like one of several stories that it's like that. They had this most recent example was Mass Effect Andromeda, which was like Mass Effect's really popular series. That game was riddled with bugs when it came out. It was terrible, and the development for it was a nightmare. We found out afterwards, interviewing with staff and everything like that. They had like a room just to cry in every now and then because they were stuck in the office the whole time. God. And they were harassed that they had to get it done on time. And so what did they do? They rushed out the door and it's broken. It's not done yet. So, but they don't, they just like, they shove it out. And that's also kind of like, because of the internet these days, like when you bought a game back in the day on like a console or something, that was it. That CD, that was the game. You couldn't have an update on that game. There was no downloading any patch or anything. That's it. That's the final version of that game. There's no other version of that game. These days they're like, oh, put it out half baked and we'll just send out a thing later on that'll fix everything. Like that's kind of like the motto. So these days you don't get games the day it comes out anymore. You wait a few weeks later until they put all the fixes in there afterwards.
I tell that to my boys all the time. It's same thing with a phone. Oh, the iPhone 4's out. Well, wait till the iPhone 4.5 and then I'll jump on board. Oh, the PS5 is coming out. It's like, you know what? Let me look at my watch. Yep, we can pay $200-300 extra bucks now and have it for Christmas, or we'll get it in June when all the bugs are worked out. The only time I remember in recent history somebody saying we have this AAA game, it's going to be a huge seller. It's the last in the trilogy, the Batman one. You know what? It's not ready. We're going to miss the Christmas release. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they were pushing it back. But they just couldn't get this one thing right with the car. And they pushed it back 2-3 months and then another 3 or 4 months. I don't think it was a year late, but they didn't want to either offend the fan base. And it's funny because you might know the company that did it. There was 3 in that trilogy, that Arkham trilogy, and then there was a 4th one that they passed on doing that came out between 2 and 3 in that series. It was kind of like a flashback, kind of one to Batman's origin. That's what it was called, Batman Origin. And the company that was doing the other 2 and working on number 3 said, no, we just want to focus on this. We don't want to get sidetracked. And even putting their focus into it, it still needed an extra 6 months to be right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of like the thing a lot of the time is that, development takes a really, really long time. And it really depends. Like, you never really know. I mean, the most recent debacle was the Cyberpunk 2077 that just came out. It's a broken mess, and they delayed it twice. And when the people, it's gotten to the point where when we hear about delays, at least in like the gaming world, we're actually kind of happy most of the time because we're like, oh, thank God they're not going to put out a broken like mess of a game. They're going to take the time to make it good. But it still came out broken because they get pushed. And it kind of depends on what company it's coming from. There's companies that are notorious for doing this, and then there's ones that like where it's pretty much always going to be good at coming out the door. These days, pretty much just Nintendo, really. The Japanese like sense of development is far different than the Western ideology in terms of like how things are. Their mentality is more so like if you put out a bad game and it's bad one time, it's bad forever. There's no going back. Like you have to have it right the first time, and that's it. They still have that sense. So I think it's better on that end. Like they announced that they were going to delay a game a year. I'm like, fine, I can wait a year. It means it's not ready. It's not ready.
But
You
I guess,
agree, Biff? Do you agree?
well,
Biff?
I don't want to get into sidetrack into the into that, but I do want to ask about the point Jock made a little bit in terms of the specific game that you point out. I think is a pretty interesting conversion of worlds because I feel like there is a difference in how you have to handle the comic book audience versus like a bad GTA versus a bad Grand Theft Auto versus a bad Batman. You're dealing with the Batman comic world, and I've seen firsthand what happens when you joke around in the comic world because I said something really silly about it was a Hawkeye or something like that, right? I said something. I demeaned a Marvel character. Just
you
as
made
a
it
joke
on the internet. Suicide.
And no, it was great. It was great. It was like 5-6 days later, like people are still ragging on me for telling me the virtues of Hawkeye, and I ragged on Batman and saying that he's kind of like Hawkeye with with better weapons, right? And
Yeah.
and all this thing, people telling me about his intelligence and stuff like that. Yeah.
I just looked at Biff because usually Biff's the one that looks at me and is like, "What? Why would you do something that dumb?" And I'm looking at Biff and like, "Dude, you're gonna get doxxed. You might have to move now."
No, that would have been awesome. That would have been awesome if they went bananas over me ragging on Batman. But I digress. But I do want you to kind of. Is there a certain sensitivity to that in terms of? I mean, to what degree do you have to pay attention to the audience? As a developer, obviously you pointed some of that out as in terms of kids versus adults.
Yeah,
but then what are some of the other finer points?
So when it comes to reoccurring series, or for example, let's take like Batman as a great example. If I was making a Batman game, first off, a lot of the advertising is done for me because I don't need to I'm not trying to introduce them to a new character. People are going to buy this because Batman's on it, and it could be named Batman whatever. It's Batman. They're going to buy it, right? So that you have that right there. So you have like your Batman. Yeah, you have your Batman audience. So it's like, okay, we have these people. We can please them and try to introduce those things. You could try to keep them happy. Then you have things where it's like if it's a sequel to an established gaming series, then you have to deal with like whatever came before it, either doing it better or making sure you don't diverge too far off. Because sometimes what people do, some companies have done, they do like a spin-off series or something like that, and people are like, well, this isn't the game that I was expecting it to be. They're really upset by that, but it's like, well, it wasn't supposed to be, but because you put the same IP on there, it offended them. So you do have to be really careful with that. There's countless times where that's pretty much come up. It is something you have to be careful with. And I mean, sequels in general are just very difficult in the gaming world itself because you have to outdo yourself, and that's really hard to do.
Can we talk a little bit about? Can you help me? I'm reaching out. I'm asking for help here. Help me understand the Roblox world. It's my littlest guy. That's he toggles back and forth. There was a 6-month window where every time I went into CVS or ran into Market Basket, he's like, "Can you get me a Roblox card?" Because we've had issues with my card being online, which they could buy stuff without me knowing. So, we've changed it where they could get those cards. How does Roblox work? Is that one company? Because sometimes I'll walk in and it's like he's doing this thing called, what was his jam? Tower of Hell. And he started a little YouTube channel for himself, and within like days had like a couple hundred people watching him play this Tower of Hell game. That when you were talking about these games that have these beautiful landscapes and the depths of field, and then I'm looking at this and I'm like, this kind of almost looks like excuse me if it just sounds stupid, but like a 16-bit game, like almost
Yeah, yeah.
blockish and stuff like that. And I know Minecraft is a blockish game, like a 16-bit game, that people just get lost in. Is Roblox a game, or is it just any? Like you said earlier, is it like YouTube where it can be anything you want?
So as a company and what it is, so it is it is a development platform. So it's kind of unique, and I kind of think that this is where most of the industry is going to end up going at some point, because they were a little bit ahead of their time, like Roblox as a platform. So what's going on here is you have a website where anyone can create a game on their engine and like on their on their like software and stuff like that, and they will host it for free. They will display it for free, just like YouTube. You make a video, you can put it up, everyone can see it, anyone can go to it. It's free hosting, all that type of stuff. And what this then means is that you can then share it with other people. So what you have is like a collaborative development environment. So if I make something, like if I make like an asset or code something on Roblox, I can share it with any other Roblox developer, and it will work when they put it in their game. So this means that, most other games, like you code it, this will only work for your game. You can't just plop software over anywhere you want and it's expected to work. It's not going to do it. In this case, it can. So you have like a large development community, and you have free hosting. So what this means also is that when I put up a game, I don't have to worry about like, oh my gosh, how many people own the PS5? I can only expect to sell this many of this game if there's only this many market share. It's free hosted. I know I'm guaranteed a player base because it's on the website with millions of players, such as your son and other people as well. In terms of the art style, it's probably just because there's like default assets that the site gives out, and most people make games with that. So there's kind of like an aesthetic that the site has leaned towards, but you could do anything really on there that you wanted. It would just require more professional developers working on that. So it kind of depends, and the site kind of leans different ways based on like whoever's really popular at the time. Some people will mimic that game or what have you, similar to YouTube. They copy different YouTubers based on whatever's popular, whatever's going around.
So when I go and buy a Roblox card and spend 25 or $50, who gets that money?
Oh, so primarily the website gets the money, but what ends up happening is that it gets converted to, typically when you get those cards, what they're doing is they're buying a virtual currency that they can spend on the site. So it gets funneled in a way. So what happens is that money then gets put on their account that they can spend in our games. And with money that they do that, then it gets funneled down to us. So it's kind of like a cycle. And they do this just so that they can balance out their own currency to manage their profit margins and stuff like that. And on top of that, we get AdSense. So you start playing the game, the loading screen, there's a little ad that plays. It's over like in a few seconds, and then we get AdSense from that. So it's both of those on top of each other. And then you have like based on the amount of currency we got in, we could do like payouts every month of however much we got.
So you develop a new game for the platform, and unlike a movie, whether it's a small indie movie or the next big Marvel movie or something like that, there's advertising and marketing. How does somebody know that hey, Besh has this new game out? Is there like a PR or marketing wing that you can bring on board, or that the company brings on board? Like when the boot up screen, how often does somebody watch what Netflix says, oh, watch this? It's like the first thing that you come on, and they're promoting this or they're promoting that. How do you develop a new game on the platform, get eyeballs?
So there's several tools that they give us as developers and that they sort of set up on the website itself. So that is I'm glad you brought up the Netflix thing, because it's very relevant. The front page, as it would be called, of when you click, there's a little button on the site. It says games. You click it, you get a big list of games. You want your game on that page on the very front. You can run ads on the site to link to your game. You can make sure you can pay to have your game sponsored on that slot, on the front slot for a while. And there's different categories, like these are the top rated games, these are the top earning games. these are what's being played the most. This is what has the most people in it right now. Those are kind of like on the front page. So you do whatever you can to get in that spot. And typically we'll spend money to try to get into those spots with a new game. We'll do several ad campaigns. And there are people who do specifically that you can hire specifically for advertising on that platform, or you could manage it yourself. And this includes developing ads, choose what's the best time to put them up. Like if I put it up at this time, I get this many people from this time zone. When are people the most online? Is a holiday coming up? Are the kids on vacation right now? Like all these things, we have to take them into account.
When you say we have to take them into account, if you're working for yourself or are you part of a team, like who is the we? And then the other question that I was just thinking, well, first, answer that one first. It's like when you say, like, we take this into account, how do you put a team together to handle that? Oh, and do you guys ever try to reach out and like, oh, how can we get, Mr. Beast to play our game? Or how can we get one of these people? I mean, how is that part of the marketing to get one of these big influencers?
Absolutely. Definitely. So when I say we, I'm speaking like as like a developer of the site for one thing, and then also I have a small team that I work with that like I've put together of other developers. Some are friends, and then some are just people that we've hired along the way to do different like departments of things. In terms of the YouTuber aspect, 100% that's part of it. So what we'll do often is that we'll put like a promotion key or something like that to give like bonus items or something in the game, and we'll just give it to the YouTuber like as a gift, and he'll be like, okay, well I got this and it's good for content, so I might as well play it and use it. Or we'll give him a thing where like, hey, you can give out like 10 of these prizes in the game to some of your viewers or something like that, and that'll get him to play. But getting them to play is very, very good. That's like that's even better than being on the front page in a lot of ways when it comes to that.
I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because I had a video show in the early 90s, a music video show, and I used to get inundated with, a new video comes out for this band, the Flaming Lips, and I would get 20 copies of the CD and just 20 T-shirts sent to me, and they're coming, and just so I would play it. But how do you reach the bigger guys? Is there ad agencies, or do you just put up there and hope they download it, or how does that structure work? Because I know in different fields, you have sales reps. Like you buy, you invent this new widget and it's the best widget ever, and your engineers came up with a widget nobody ever thought could be invented. You still need a sales force to go out and let people know that this new widget is there. How do you guys approach that?
Well, for us, there's one group of people who basically this is all they do on the website is they have the contacts, they have they know all the right people. That's one way of doing it. The other way is like you just have to find whatever avenues you can. What is their business email, like all these types of things. Like where can we get in touch with this guy if we have to. The other thing too is that sometimes you just get lightning in a bottle and they play it just because your game is there, and that has happened, and that's really good in most cases. So it kind of depends. But when it comes to the advertising, a lot of it is for at least for me and my team is we do it ourselves. Like we've done it before. We've been in it before, and the community as a whole, the developer community on the platform is very I want to say too close. But everyone shares everything. We talk and stuff like that. And every year there is a developers conference that people go to. Obviously not this last year, but that we go to when we meet up and we talk and stuff like that. And there's kind of like almost a friendly rivalry about it, because every time they're playing your game, you're not playing my game. But like that sort of sense is there. But there's some camaraderie between for sure, and that kind of helps us get those things that we need.
And our video games a fad that are just going to be going away anytime soon, or do you think this is going to be around for a while? Are these talking pictures going to stick, or are people going to want to go back to silence?
I think they're here to stay. I think it's safe to say it's here to stay. I think it's probably going to be a lot different in maybe 30 years or something like that.
I mean, I think that's a great point, right? Because I mean, just as in the movies, right? We've always I go back far enough so that I played video games, exclusively on keyboards because, and then eventually they came up with this concept called the joystick that plugs into your computer, which was just mind blowing. But of course, now we have the console with the controllers, and then we have the second. It almost seems like a separate animal of touch screens, right? But kind of, in terms of that, I mean, can you talk a little bit in terms of whether it's VR or whatever, where the video game might, where
Absolutely.
you're maybe even targeting, I guess.
I was actually just talking to someone about this the other day
Yeah.
on my dev team about VR. I don't think VR is going absolutely anywhere, and I don't think that it's going to be the future by any means, because we've had there's a lot of problems with VR, because I could develop a game for VR if I wanted, but I'm probably not going to do it because, one, the market share is extremely small, and there's a lot of things like just getting into VR. One, you need a computer that can run it, one that's strong enough to run it if you don't already have a console. So we're talking like, let's say $500 at bare minimum. Then you have to get the actual VR set, which is like another $200, $300, maybe even more. And so we're getting pretty high in price here. So very, very few people. And then on top of that, there hasn't really been, like, VR has been here for almost 10 years, and there hasn't really been any big VR games still. And every time I see it, it's like, oh, they put Skyrim or Fallout on the VR. It's like, yeah, but where's the VR game? Where's the game that I can only play on VR? Yeah. The one that you need to have VR if you want to play this game. It doesn't exist. No, I don't think it will.
It's funny you say that, because we just, for Christmas, the boys got new Switches, but the oldest one traded his Switch in for an Oculus. It just came today.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, he just, is on the PS4, and he's like, yeah, I'll set up tomorrow. He's excited to play it, but it's interesting. I want to ask you, like, where you see games in 5 years. It's funny how big gaming is that, my buddy and I, who I started the podcast with, he's a huge gamer, has all the latest everything, but how often I'll be talking to him and he's playing, a PS2 game, or my wife just the other day, for the first time ever, the little guy brought his Switch upstairs and plugged it into the big TV, and she sat down and was playing Mario. So there's all these great new games and exciting things, but yet people go back to either their comfort zone or I just want a simple game. I just want to do a puzzle game, or I don't want. So where do you think games are going to be in like the next 5 or 10 years? And how long do you see yourself doing this? Do you think you're ever going to be like, yeah, developing games is great, but I want to move on to X, Y, and Z? Or do you see this, this is what I'm going to be doing till I do the dirt nap?
I'm definitely leaning more towards the latter on that last one. It seems right now, but who knows? People change. But in terms of I think that it is definitely returning to your comfort zone. The other thing is that your buddy and I are probably a lot alike in the sense that like I have a lot of games that I just collect, and most of the games I want to play are old games that I didn't get to play, or maybe I didn't have that console as a kid. I want to go play that. And I have nostalgia for it. Obviously, that's probably a factor. But it's also just, it is in the sense that holding the controller and playing, one, it's just easy. It's an easier way to play a game. Getting up and standing up with the VR controller and stuff like that, this is it's more work almost to have it's more like an experience. It's the difference between someone described it very well. It's the difference between staying home and watching someone on a roller coaster and then going on it yourself. Not every day do I feel like going on a roller coaster. Yeah. So it's sort of similar in that sense. I think that if we're ever going to have any type of VR experience, it's going to be way down the line in the future, to the point where it's like brain machine interface or something like that. This is the only time this is going to people are going to want to sit their ass down and they're going to play with their head. They don't want to get up and move. I don't think it's going to happen like that.
I was in LA last summer, and a couple malls had these VR shops where you were walking in, and they weren't rigs you could get for your house, and they were really immersive, and they were pretty.
Well, it wasn't last summer; it was the previous summer.
Yeah, it wasn't last summer; it was the previous summer. Thank you. So I want to get a couple more things in here before we let you go. When you see movies like Ready Player One, or movies where people like you who make these games and develop these games. Do you think you've seen accurate portrayals of programmers, or do you think there's just this stereotypical, way that people in your profession are portrayed? And do you think it's fair, or do you think it's unfair?
There's definitely a lot of stereotypes, and in terms of portrayal, and as in terms of like Ready Player One, it was very kitschy, and I think that was possibly intentional. And also kind of like this was clearly made by an adult who doesn't know anything about this kind of thing. That kind of comes through a little bit,
That's
which
shocking to hear. That
yeah,
would
it's
happen
like
in a movie?
Hollywood doing that. It's
Oh my
unheard of.
god, that is shocking.
But I don't think like in terms of like this stereotype, I think that a lot of times it's like, I mean, there's still some people out there who think that people who play video games are like, 30-year-old virgin living in mom's basement type mentality. It's like, which is everyone plays games like these days. I don't care if you're playing like Candy Crush on your phone. You're playing a video game. I would say probably everybody would enjoys video games at the end of the day if they play them like at any point. So I think that the portrayal is very wrong. The other thing is that it's always considered also that it's always men who are programmers in video. Just not the case at all. There's tons of women in the development and in game development and stuff like that. Absolutely. So I think that that's kind of like also the sense too.
No, it's funny because I know how awful women can be, treated in the gaming world and in the male toxicity. And it's funny because we've done a podcast before, and again, my partner Joe, he's forgotten more about this than I ever know, and it all broke down to the early '80s or late '70s when games started to come, and the toy department, the people at KB Toys or Toys R Us, it's like there wasn't a video section. So, well, it's just a boys' game or a girls' game, and they put the video sections in the boys' game, and even to
It's
today.
stuck.
Right, even to today, it's like, oh, girls have to wear pink. It's like, what? So my big thing to you, it's funny because you talked about a conference because video game programmers are pigeonholed into like you're all a bunch of Sheldons who can't have a conversation with other people.
Yeah.
And that's not the truth.
Well, there's some truth to it in the sense that do these people exist? Absolutely, they exist. But like, I don't think it's the vast majority of people. I mean, you go to the conference and it's just these people. There's no one else there. It's just these people. So, there are people I would say who are kind of like almost like me, where they're in it so deep that this is all they're doing all the time, and that's going to hurt you socially a little bit. But I would say most of the people are very sociable and like pretty not what you would expect. All walks of life type deal. Really. So,
in my line of work, and I don't know how Biff, line of work, I have absolutely zero marketable skills, and I never have. As you could see from the 20 minutes of trying to get the same equipment going that we've been using forever, and I still don't use it. But my career has been 95% just networking. I'm a really good networker. In your field, how does somebody who is a graphic artist, who isn't a programmer but is great at this, or the music side of it? Because I know, because I come from the music world, I know so many people who do music for movies and commercials, and I know some people who are just these jaw-dropping musicians who can hear something once and play it back note for note, who just live for video game music. And a lot of people, because if you ask me, Bash right now, like, how do I take a NBA team to a military tour on the other side of the world? I can hook you up. How does a movie go from somebody's head to the screen? I can tell you, the 1,000 different ways, but this is the most common way. But how do people get into your field? How does a composer find his way from, his rig and his keyboard and writing hundreds of hours of music over the years to actually getting his music into games?
Right. So these days, because of the internet, just put yourself out there. Make your stuff and put it somewhere. Someone is going to see it. In terms of where I'm doing my stuff on the platform, or if you're doing post it on there, share it with people. That is how I find people that I work with. Is like I see it, I'm like, man, this person's stuff is amazing. Like we have to get them. That's kind of how it goes a lot of the time. If you post your stuff out there and you let people see it, they'll take notice if it's good. You have to, but that's very, very important. And it's funny because even like in AAA industry, as an artist, if you don't have like a Twitter going or like Instagram of your art, you're not going to get a job. You have to do these things. You have to put your stuff up. In terms of like music, especially too, very much so. Music is a little bit harder to put out there because, art, I could just look at it. Music, I have to click on it and take some time to listen to it, and to really appreciate it. So music, it tends to be like if you're looking for a musician, you're really actively looking. I do most of the music for my own stuff, thankfully, but finding like a really good composer is pretty tough a lot of the time.
And just music. So it's interesting how everything is different because again, in my line of work, it doesn't matter. I have some, and Biff knows a lot of these people and he's met a lot of them, some really well-known actors who never get their jobs from managers or agents. 95% of their jobs is they went to this party. They play hockey with this person. They network.
Well, okay, but let's stay on topic. I think because I think you were hitting a good point, which is that there is a certain synergy to creative programming versus structured programming and music.
Yeah.
Because music is a structured. I mean, playing instruments is structured. Creating music is not. So do you have that synergy as a creator of both music and the games?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd say that it's kind of funny as someone who's done both, like as both a musician and like a programmer, they're more similar than a lot of people might think. And I say this to a lot of people who are kind of like new at programming. Programming will change the way you see everything. Everything kind of breaks down structurally, and music is the same way. If you really get into music and like with music theory, everything looks different to you after that. Everything, a facet of life, really. And they do go very much hand in hand. I think that the only reason I can even compose music is because I program so much, honestly, because I'm not nearly as good a composer as I am a programmer. They definitely go together.
So it's interesting. You've seen this when people take like Jaws and make it, or The Shining, and recut it to make it look like a family-friendly movie. It is funny how much music can change, something. Have you ever, and program something, develop something, put your own music in, and then been too close to it where you've like, hey, I'm going to reach out and have something else and hear if somebody hears it differently? Because it's funny, with bands and stuff like that, it's a lot, it's funny because I've been jamming with the same guy forever, and he'll have a song, I won't see him for several months, that he's pretty much worked out. And sometimes he'll put drums to it, but then when I come over and play it, I hear it differently. And so many times he's like, it's such a better song because somebody else's ears were in it. Is that part of the collaboration process where, same thing with graphics, like you specialize in this, and you can do music and you can do the other aspects of it, but somebody who that's what they specialize in, does it help? Do you see it as like, oh, this could help elevate everything?
Absolutely, especially because games encompass so many art forms. I kind of do like a little bit of, I've ended up like learning a little bit of everything, but I'm primarily a programmer and designer. So I kind of I have to know all these things to have like a development team. I have to understand how they do their job and how someone else does their job. Otherwise, I can't put it all together effectively. So we all kind of have a fair understanding of each other's stuff. And a lot of the times that I do art, which I'm not primarily an artist, but like I do some of the art, I have to share it with a real artist, because to get their sense of and they're like, oh, does this look good or am I full of crap? Is it actually terrible? And being honest with each other is very, very important, because you don't want to waste anybody's time. You want to know whether it's bad or good. So that kind of code can't really lie to you in a lot of ways. It's it either works or it doesn't. Yep. Whereas art, it could work for someone, it might not work for somebody else. So it kind of can go either way. So it really depends. But I do believe that there is some objectivity when it comes to music. I think that there are things that are objectively good in music. I know a lot of people say music is pretty relative, and in some ways it is, but there is objective music, in my opinion, and the same for art and everything else. There's things that are just objectively appealing to people.
That's the magic of the jingles, right? Our ad jingles, there's a certain thing,
yeah.
right? Like sometimes they catch it, right?
It's funny, yeah, because like ad jingles is like it's so smart and they're so like commercialized, but like they're kind of genius, aren't they?
Right.
Because
Yeah,
like it's
absolutely.
like they must be good, right? Because everyone remembers them, so they must be good in some way, right? So
Well, it's funny because you were way too young to. Bash, have you ever heard of the guy Barry Manilow?
yeah,
He,
yeah,
he
I
was
did.
he was so famous in like the late 70s and 80s, but to this day, the most money he's ever made. I mean, he's had probably 10 top 10 hits, probably maybe 10 even number one hits. But he did, and help me out, Biff, if you know.
Dr. Pepper, right?
He did. I think he did Dr. Pepper. I know he did. I'm stuck on Band-Aid and Band-Aid.
Yeah, yeah.
You
And then-
deserve a break today.
Yep.
And like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Yeah, all of those. Yeah,
Like
crazy.
honestly, his biggest things were like 5-second jingles. No, so it is. So I'm gonna let if Biff has any tech questions, I'll let him ask those last. But Bash, while I have you, what are your 3 favorite movies that particularly profile like programmers, and what are give me your 3-4 favorite all-time games, like if you were on a desert island and you could only bring 4 games or 5 games or 3 games, what are you bringing?
Can I extrapolate on that a little bit?
Please,
I do want to
please.
hear your top 3 or 4 games, but I also want to hear your Mount Rushmore of the greatest games also, because I think those are 2 different questions, right?
Yeah, they are. Because
Yeah.
what I like is my favorites is definitely not the best games necessarily.
Well, I mean, even
but-
not even best, but greatest is a different
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
a thing also, right? So yeah,
It
so
kind of yeah, that's a hard one. In terms of like favorite movies, like when you say like profiling programmers, like what do you mean exactly? Like
Yeah,
I think anything that so like here's an example, and maybe not this is a crappy one, but there was one of the diehards where there were these programmers who were technically
yeah.
hackers, right? That kind
Yeah.
of broke into various systems to get to different. The one with Josh Duhamel, was he? No, the other guy. I can't remember the guy's name. But so there's stuff like that. So that
War
Yeah,
games,
yeah.
do you want to play a game?
I was about to say war games would probably be my favorite. I mean, here's the thing though, it's kind of funny because pop culture and stuff, and people hear programmer and they think that you're some like super genius or something like that. It's why it's because in movies and TV they make us look like we're really, really smart.
Yep.
It's like you don't need to be smart to be a programmer. There's a lot. It helps, but like people who are really good are smart, but people who are really good at anything are pretty smart anyway. So it's like it's not really a programmer thing. Favorite movies just in general, I think Gattaca is probably my favorite movie. And then video games, Zelda Link to the Past is probably my favorite video game. And best like Mount Rushmore of games, I don't know, like it's kind of hard to define because it's like like what games are important kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah,
some
and
games are important,
yeah, so
some
I
other
think-
ones
I
are
think
not.
that's a
Yeah.
great- and I don't think that I'm not looking for the right answer as much as to get a sense, right? Because so if you were to so like I'm a novice, I'm not a major game guy, but like the ones that come to mind are really like Mario is going to be one,
Yeah.
Doom is going to be one, to me Resident Evil is going to be one, and the other one is going to be Grand Theft Auto, and it's kind of my arbitrary
Yeah.
assembly of combination of popularity and influence and stuff
Right.
like
Well,
that.
there's no wrong answers except
Right.
Biff's answer was wrong because he didn't have Gallagher in there. So other
whatever.
than so Mount Rushmore, you got, but you can only pick 3 because Gallagher's number 1. No, I'm just kidding. So what are your?
I would
games, Ash?
definitely put Mario on there just because it changed a lot. It would change a lot of things.
Yep.
It made it so like before Mario, games were arcades, and then when they came to the home into your home, they kept designing them like you were at the arcade. And Mario decided that that was no longer going to be the case. So that really was really important. Man, I do agree with Gallagher though. I do like Gallagher. Man, that's a hard one. I really have to think about this because even there's some stuff that I would consider like recently that could even be on there at this point because things have evolved so far, like they really have. I would say definitely like things like Oblivion, part of the Elder Scrolls series.
Yeah.
I think that there wouldn't be a lot, or I guess even Morrowind, which came before it, but there wouldn't be a lot of the open. That was kind of like more of the early open world games. Like we really didn't have that as like a thing prior, and I don't think things like Grand Theft Auto and stuff would really have existed otherwise if it wasn't for that. So there's been a lot, but even before that, we had. I mean, even the text adventures were technically open world, but like they're not really in the same sense. But yeah, that's a hard one. But definitely Link to the Past is my favorite game. I really like Cave Story as well. That's a really fun game too. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. New Fallout New Vegas, absolutely best Fallout game, in my opinion.
How many games do you think you've programmed? How many games are quote unquote yours?
Let me think. Mine is in like only I worked on them, or like that I would consider my vision or something.
Right, that you were part of the team that you take ownership in, or that you came up with, that you helped, like
stuff that you'd put on your resume.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Okay. Probably 6 to 8 by now. Yeah.
And can you do you want to talk about them, or which do you have a favorite? You know.
I usually hate most things that I make, most of the time. They usually ends
that doesn't sound like anybody we know that they hate the stuff that they're creating.
It kind of depends. I mean, so it's so the one thing I had that was like really popular that I did really well was something I put like no work into, and that really frustrated me. Because I was like, you like this of all the things that you like this, and I really like got to me for a while, and I was like,
but that happens a lot to musicians, right? I mean, right?
People I was working with are like, you should be happy. It's generally good. I was like, I don't want this to be the thing that does good. It does good though.
Biff will tell you, because we're both big music guys, how many bands that we love who hate their biggest song, and it's like
it's not so much hate as much as like when it's really about the effort, right? Like there are songs that they put in. They said, well, you need another song to put in to give us a full album. And then say, okay, well, so we'll throw this thing in, and suddenly that's the monster hit, right?
Like the ones that I can think of, the band Blur with song number 2, woohoo, da, 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 that's been used in every movie for the past one. That they don't have any other song that sounds anything like that. That's a 4th gear song, and they're always in 2nd gear. They were just doing that, joking around in the studio, and it becomes the biggest hit ever. Same thing, the Clash were on their way to a studio, and they had a deadline, and they had like a day or 48 hours, and like, should I stay or should I go? Was this song, and we're London Calling. They labored over it. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack, but but it's so Besh. If you want to, we will post to all your socials if you want people to be able to hear more or see more of your stuff. Biff, do you have any like last parting, questions?
I think this was great. This was fascinating. It was great speaking to you, and I learned a lot. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
In terms of socials, we're in the process of putting together a new studio and stuff. So we don't have them yet, but we'll have some pretty new ones soon. Maybe I'll get back to you on that. Put it on the thing.
I can't apologize enough for taking so long to get up and running today.
No, it's all right. It happens.
And honestly, I hope we haven't bored you enough where you don't want to come back on, because this has been
it's been a blast. It's been an absolute blast. I would totally come back on, of course.
Well, with that said, Biff, any last final thoughts before I hit the stop button?
Yeah, we're great. Thank you so much, Besh.
You too, guys. Thank you so much.
But it's really important. Now, remember, please don't forget.